Hello and welcome to another edition of And Did Those Feet, the podcast which celebrates 25 years of English football from 1945 to 1970. And today I'm joined by Karl, as always. Hello, Karl.
Hi, Peter.
Today we're going to stray a little bit outside our natural boundaries because we're going to go back before 1945, in fact, 6 years back to 1939 to 45. And when we talk about football and the war, we're not really going to talk about the immense amount of football that took place in this country during the war years. That's not really our project. There were lots of local leagues, there were cup competitions. Football was a great leveler in the war years. We're not really going to look at that. We're going to look more at how the great stars of the 40s and 50s had in their backgrounds remarkable episodes of, I mean, frankly, military heroism. For example, behind you, Karl, is Tom Finney. Now, Tom Finney had an extraordinary war, but not so unusual, in fact, for many footballers. So when we think of Tom Finney in the 1940s and 50s, playing for Preston, 60 caps for England, keeping Preston in the first division, reaching the cup final in 54, footballer of the year twice, we don't really think of him also as a tank commander in the Western Desert with the Eighth Army fighting for Montgomery, for the West, for the Allies against Rommel. Nor do we think of him in his in Italy, where when the Allies. I mean, this is quite a common move that quite a lot of these guys who are footballers and soldiers, they start off in North Africa, but they then move to Italy
Yeah.
and it's to sort of 43, 44. Rome is liberated in June 44. Finney is involved in. I mean, there's a battle of the Argenta Gap, I'm told, which is now there's quite a lot of the footballers that were in the British Army in the 39-45 war take the same path. They're in North Africa to begin with, then they're in Italy fighting their way. And by the way, when we come to people like Bob Paisley fighting at Anzio, these are really very bloody battles, and you'd never imagine seeing Finney lining up with Matthews and Mortensen and so forth, that he had this in his background. But that's really what we're going to. So really, we're asking the question: what did you do in the war? And with people like Tom Finney, remarkable stories and tremendous. I mean, certainly, we talk about football heroes, but these are genuinely deserve the name. Did you find any really admirable um, stories of military daring do from these footballers?
I think one thing that struck me is how difficult it was actually to find very specific stories of great bravery, which I think shows not that they didn't happen, they certainly did, but how modest the men were.
Modest, yes.
They, they were incredibly so.
Mm.
You would think that these famous, these people who either going into the war were already famous or like Tom Finney became famous afterwards. Um, the world would be full of the stories of what they did during the war, but it's not something that they trumpeted. Um, that said, I think uh, possibly the most remarkable story that I saw concerned Stan Mortensen,
Yes,
and, and
incredible.
how very close to death he came when he was in a bomber that crashed.
So just remind us, Stan Mortensen, Blackpool in England in the 1940s
Yes,
and 50s, Patrick
yes,
Hero in the 53 Cup final, etc.
that's right.
But
And
what happened with, go on, what happened
and
with the
so
bomber?
yes, Mark Watson was in a bomber that crashed. And to be honest, Peter, I've seen contradictory stories, so I'm not 100% sure. So one version I've seen is that there were three other people in the plane with him, and all three were killed. And Mortensen was badly injured but recovered. The other version of it was that two others died, and one other person in the plane lost his leg.
Okay.
Um, so
Nevertheless, I think
slightly
more,
different, but nevertheless, it obviously was a terrible event. Mortensen was clearly very close to death. At first, he thought, or the doctors thought, he'd never play football again.
they put a steel plate in his head. So whenever you watch the 53 Cup final or the 53 game against the Hungarians on YouTube, every time you watch And by the way, in these days, a centre forward's job was to head the ball.
Yes,
Um,
first and foremost, those, yes.
before anything else on his assessment criteria. Heading the ball would be up there. And but more you've got to bear in mind that Mortensen is doing it with a steel plate and certainly I've heard various stories about it. I think I've heard seven in the crew, all and
Right.
six die, and Mortensen's the only survivor. He's about 20 years old, isn't he, at about this time? He's just really
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the
yes,
verge of
it was
manhood.
19 or
And
20, yeah.
as
Yeah,
many of
he's
these
very,
as so many of these players are, extraordinary. I mean, Bob Paisley we mentioned. Actually, one of the things that struck me was most of these players join the army. Very few of them do what Mortensen does and joins the RAF. There are people who join the RAF. Tom
every one of
Whitaker.
them, yeah.
Tom Whitaker is a squadron lead. He's the Arsenal manager.
Yeah,
He's going to become the Arsenal manager. He's not at this point. He's on the staff at Arsenal. He's a squadron leader who is decorated with an MBE for his work on D-Day. Now, I think to get an MBE for D-Day, you've got to have been pretty brave. And no, I'm sure that's exactly right. But mainly these are soldiers, aren't they? So you get many
yeah,
stories like Bob Paisley. Bob Paisley is an extraordinary story of he's in the Western Desert, like we said, so many of these soldiers are. Bob Paisley at this time is a junior footballer. He's aged about 20 at the beginning of the war, and he's with Liverpool. And he subsequently goes on to become, I think it's fair to say, in purely in terms of trophies won, the greatest manager of a club
yes,
side in English football history. I mean, maybe Alex Ferguson,
yes,
but if you start with European Cups, then Bob Paisley is top of the table. He's in the war. He's in the Western Desert again with Tom Finney, with Montgomery, with the Eighth Army. He's driving a tank, and same as Tom Finney. Um, he's and other vehicles. I mean, it's various different tasks to perform. He's blinded temporarily by an explosion of a shell, which fires sand into his eyes. He can't see for several days. Um, he then subsequently joins the exodus to Italy and is involved in the invasion of Italy. So I've got him as El Alamein, and then Sicily, and then Rome. On to Rome. Rome is liberated in June 44, just before D-Day, if I remember rightly. And there is a kind of repercussions for this 30 years later when he's manager of Liverpool. This extraordinary side, I don't know if you know the story, Karl, that he
I do,
says
but
to
only
this.
from you, Peter, from
Oh,
you
okay.
telling
He
me.
says to he's playing he's managing Liverpool. They've reached the European Cup final. The final is taking place in Rome, and he says to his they're playing Borussia Mönchengladbach in the European Cup final, and he says to his players before the match that he had to conquer Rome on a tank, and all they've got to do is conquer it on a pitch. And
Yeah,
of course, they do subsequently go on to achieve that. So it's one of the few moments. I mean, I agree with you. These players are very modest about their part in the war. It's one of the few moments when it gets mentioned, I think. But of course, it is a reminder that to people like me and you who can remember Bob Paisley from when we were young, that
yeah,
really anyone aged over 60 or 70, in many ways, probably quite possibly had a heroic background to them, and which they probably didn't talk very much about, like Bob Paisley.
yeah. And the other thing that strikes me with where Paisley is an example is, of course, these people, history could have been so different very, very easily by somebody like Paisley being killed during the war if that had happened. And he had something of a narrow escape apparently, in that his unit went out to the Far East and he was kept back in order to captain a team, a football team. And this isn't to imply that that's what he wanted to do, it's
No.
what his commanding officer
Yes.
wanted. And his unit out in the Far East was overwhelmed by the Japanese.
Yes.
And if Paisley had been there, he almost certainly would have been either killed or captured as a prisoner of war, which of course that in turn may have led to him being killed
Yes.
anyway. Uh, Now, he then went on and was. It's not that, obviously, from how you've described it, he certainly wasn't sheltered from the dangers of war by any stretch of the
No.
imagination. He fought in a really bitter campaign, say North Africa and going up through Italy. But nevertheless, it seems that he fate fate helped him somewhat by not being caught by the Japanese.
Yes.
And it is a reminder, just how easily things could have been so different for these people.
Interestingly, Wilf Mannion, who's sort of somewhat of a contemporary, I think, for Paisley. I thought he'd be born about 1920. Very well known, brilliant inside forward for
Yes,
Middlesbrough in the years after the war, and of Middlesbrough in England, by the way. And is said to be part of. There's a famous forward line, isn't there? Which is did they
that's
was it
right.
the one against Portugal or Italy? Finney, Matthews, Mannion, Lawton, Shackleton's perhaps. A brilliant forward line of
Yeah.
said I think by Brian Glanville reckoned to be the best forward line England ever put out. Wilf Mannion had a similar. He was at Dunkirk. I mean, one of the things that strikes you actually with these is the variety of their experiences. He was at Dunkirk, presumably rescued from there, at Sicily, at Anzio, so this very bloody battle to gain access to the Italian mainland. And at that point, his unit was so shot up at Anzio that it was basically disbanded and he was given rehabilitative leave. In other words, he was told, you stand down from duty. You've done
Mm.
enough. Now, the next time we hear of Wilf Mannion is when he's in dispute with his employers at Middlesbrough, trying to loosen really the bonds that shackled players to clubs in those days and trying to get a bit more freedom of movement because he wanted to move on. Um, you never think, or I never thought, certainly reading about Mannion or seeing the part he played in international matches after the war, I never imagined that he would have that extraordinary history behind him. So much bravery and courage on his part. He wasn't the only one, by
And
the
I
way.
suppose I suppose what it does is it puts being a footballer very much into context for those people. Unfortunately, the best quote I can think of related to that doesn't come from a footballer. It comes from a cricketer who Keith Miller, the great Australian
Yes,
all-rounder.
yes,
I think you'll probably know it, Peter, when he was asked about pressure,
yes,
and he pointed out that pressure wasn't really batting in a test match; it was having a Messerschmitt up your backside.
yes.
Uh, and I suppose if you're looking at a story like you've just described of Mannion and in trying to argue at Middlesbrough Football Club, he's hardly going to be very intimidated if he's been through the things you've just described at D-Day and so on.
No, of course, and of course, the other thing was that Middlesbrough were trying to, in a way, fit him back into a box when he had already had too much experience really for that to be possible. And well, in
Yeah.
the end, they won, and he stood there. He went on strike for 6 months. But it
Mm.
seems a hard. The quote that strikes me about these players is the opening line of a Graham Greene novel. Ours is an heroic age, though we refuse to treat it heroically. These
Yes.
were genuinely heroic
Yeah.
people who didn't treat it heroically. Another, I mean, I'm kind of thinking of Mannion having been invalided out. Another player who was invalided out of the services, but then returned to football because we're really only looking at people who were around in 45 to 60, 65, 70,
Mm.
that period. George Hardwick, also a Middlesbrough player. Uh,
Yes.
so the story goes that he was shot up in a Luftwaffe attack on his unit and sustained injuries in both legs. After the war, which I presume must mean bullet injuries in both legs. After the war, he plays for England. He's captain of England in each of his 13 matches that he plays. So he's obviously recovered to some extent. I mean, presumably, although his career comes to quite an abrupt end early on. But he was on the home front in that sense. With his unit when the Luftwaffe attacked, and obviously quite serious. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're a footballer getting shot in both legs, um, not the
Oh,
best.
I mean, when I think I always used to think of it as just this tragedy. This tragedy, and of course, it is a tragedy. People killed, badly injured. Uh, Less of a tragedy, but still very sad that these players missed so much of their careers. And yet, there is another side to it in the way in which players described how being in the war changed them for the good and had a massive influence on them.
Yes,
Uh, pe- People like Bill Nicholson, who we've talked about before,
yes.
um,
Ramsey, Busby.
yes, that they wouldn't really have, in in one way, they wouldn't have swapped what happened because of what
Yeah.
it did for them as
Mm,
people.
mm.
Um, Ramsey was famously somebody who sometimes found it difficult to get along with other people.
Yeah.
But he had to do that to a certain extent, obviously, as a football manager.
Yeah.
And to the degree that he could, that he thought was largely because of his experience during the war
Yes.
and how that changed him as a person.
Yes.
And then of course, so many of them having experience as PT instructors.
Mm. It did.
That's a very common route, and that clearly helped them to become coaches and managers.
Yes, I suspect that most sort of professional footballers and professional cricketers were probably encouraged to become physical training instructors in different ways, by the way. Who was I reading about? Oh, Rach Carter. Rach Carter, did he play for Derby?
He did
Um,
play for Derby,
it's
yes.
said to be, do you know Rach Carter's claim to fame?
Oh no, no, I just know that he was an extremely good inside forward
Yes.
for Derby
I think I'm
in
right in
England.
saying he's the only footballer who wins an FA Cup winners medal before the war and after the war. He's plays in that 46 final. Um,
Yeah,
the one that, well, another remarkable story really along these lines because the 46 final, I'll talk about Rach Carter in a second, but but in the 46 final, Derby 4, Charlton 1 possibly, and the ball
yes.
burst, of course. Well, who was behind the shot when the ball burst? Jackie Stamps. Jackie Stamps, a name that is still known in the East Midlands, I think, because I think there's an award at Derby named after Jackie Stamps,
Ah,
and rightly
okay.
so in a way because Stamps scores twice in the 1946 Cup final, but a mere 6 years earlier he's on a beach in Dunkirk waiting for the British to pick him up, and he's been chased by the German blitzkrieg that crashes through the Low Countries, and he's waiting on it to be picked up in Dunkirk and brought back to England. That's 1940. 1946, he's scoring 2 goals to win the FA Cup. So there's this extraordinary. I think it's one of the sort of remarkable features about this is the way that in their background these players have these extraordinary events, so
Mm,
different from what they're experiencing now. To go back to Rach Carter, he
yes,
initially worked as an ARP, an air raid, a fireman, I think, actually, in
right.
Sunderland. That was his first job. And of course, Sunderland was heavily attacked because why? Because it's got docks, I suppose.
Yeah,
It was a strong industrial town in those days, and
yeah, shipbuilding and so
and
on.
I think it was attacked heavily by the Luftwaffe. And to be a fireman or air raid warden in that kind of a place is incredibly dangerous, I would imagine. Anyway, apparently Rach Carter came under a certain amount of pressure for not having signed up with the services. So with any of the
Right.
armed services, isn't that extraordinary? So he abandoned his job at Sunderland as an air raid warden and a fireman to work joined the RAF and he worked rehabilitating airmen who were physically damaged by their experiences in the war. And it's a curious thing that I mean, it's a reminder that there are a lot in any war, and especially in a total war, there are lots of different jobs. But a reminder
Yeah,
too of where the danger lay. I mean, I do think I see exactly his point of view that actually the danger lay in being a firefighter in a city under attack
absolutely.
like Sunderland. So other jobs that I noticed as I did a bit of reading around on this was include the fact that Len Shackleton spent the war assembling aircraft radios. It's a reminder that there are all sorts of jobs that need to be done in a war of this kind.
Yes,
And
yes.
Len Shackleton, sort of famous sort of inside forward, centre forward for Newcastle in the years after the war, had a really just quite a technical job. Rach Carter, as I said initially, an ARP, then rehabilitating. Bertie Mee, who
He was also ARP, wasn't he? Before he went into the RAF.
he was well,
Oh no,
he was a
sorry, not
medical
Bertie
man.
Mee. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the other Arsenal manager. Sorry, you've
Right.
already mentioned.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Bertie Mee is the manager in 70-71 when they win the double,
Yes,
so it's just outside our remit. But
but he
he's in
trained
the
as a physio, didn't he?
he did train and he's in the Royal Army Medical Corps in the war and operating
Yeah.
at West Netley Hospital, Southampton, where apparently it was for American soldiers. So in those days when America could be depended upon for military things, that was where he worked. And finally, as I'm just thinking about the home front here, here's an extraordinary story. Bert Sproston, is that a name you know?
No, it isn't.
Bert Sproston is a fullback for Manchester City in the years in the 30s, late 30s. And
Mm.
he's part of that Manchester City team, which extraordinarily wins the league one year and goes down the next. And
Yes,
in spite of the fact that they're the leading goal scorers in the first division. I mean, it is an extraordinary mess. Anyway, Bert Sproston is in that team, and he's also in the England team that beats Germany in 1938, beats them 6-3 after being made to do the Hitler salute. So he's a member of that team as well. He's right
right.
back for that team. And when he's in Germany, he's approached by a young Jewish male, aged about 17 or 18, who says to him, "Can you find a way of getting me out of Germany? Because I can't stay here." And Sproston, I think most people would possibly find that quite difficult, but Sproston pursued it. And he went to the FA, and the FA arranged a friendly football match, which the young Jewish male from Germany was invited to take part in. The football match, I don't think the football match actually in the end took place. It doesn't really matter. What happened was they did get the guy out and out of Germany and saved his life. And so there
Well,
is a strange little picture of how war can throw people into unsuspecting situations. This is not a situation that Bert Croston would have had any idea about how to tackle it and so forth. He was a very ordinary fellow, obviously outstanding footballer. But the fates cast him in this difficult, and he measured up.
yeah, yeah. Well, another person you mentioned that infamous game, really, where the England team did a Nazi salute before the match, under pressure, of course, from the FA. And one person I think came out from that with enormous credit
Yeah,
was was a top manager, was Stan Cullis,
indeed.
who who was dropped from the game because he'd made it clear in advance that he wouldn't be joining in and throwing up a Nazi salute.
Yeah.
Um, and okay, that was just before the war, but it says something of a different sort of courage that he took that stand. And then he was somebody, another one who was a PT
Yeah, he was.
instructor during the war,
Yeah.
and perhaps that was a reason why he became a manager at such a young age. He was only 31
Yes.
when he first became manager of Wolves,
Mm.
and perhaps that was something to do with his wartime experience, but also that strength of character that he showed by refusing to join in with the Nazi salute against Germany.
Yes, I mean he is permanently to be respected for that very gesture.
Yeah.
I don't think any of the players wanted to give it. He was the only one who, in the end, said, "I'm not
Yeah,
giving
I
it."
mean,
Because
the
the
young
players,
men. I mean, I think the blame has to lie absolutely overwhelmingly with the FA rather than the players who succumb to the pressure by giving that salute. But
yes, and
nevertheless,
the
Covey still deserves a lot of praise for not doing.
he definitely does. Bear in mind that the whole state of the British government's policy was appeasement, and so I would also throw in. You want to blame the FA, which I wouldn't disagree, but I would also want to throw in the British ambassador to Berlin. Was it Sir Neville
Mm.
Henderson?
I
Um,
think it was, yes.
and from whom, who really did make it clear to the FA that this had to happen. And
Mm.
so I think he's to blame too. England internationals who fought in the war. Some quite interesting figures here. Wilf Copping, who plays for England before the war, plays for
Yeah.
Arsenal, fullback. It ends up as a sergeant major. It serves in North Africa. My word, I wouldn't, if he told me what to do, I would do it. To look at the size of the chap. He was a big unit. Bill Jones, who played for Liverpool. Bill Jones is one of the many centre halves who ended up getting an England cap on the back of the fact that Neil Franklin wasn't going to play
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, a great sadness, really, but we shouldn't laugh. But nevertheless, Bill Jones does come in. Bill Jones plays in the 1950 World Cup for England as a centre half. I think he plays in the dreadful game against the United States. He had quite a heroic war in 1944 on the German border. So we know German border
Mm.
that was the fighting was at its most intense. Rescued a wounded colleague under pressure, under fire, and was awarded the military medal. So that's the equivalent of the military cross for non-commissioned officers. That's quite an achievement. I mean, it's not far off the Victoria Cross. And
Yes.
I mean, I did not know that about Bill Jones. All I knew about Bill Jones was that he played in the Liverpool team that won the title in 46 and was
Yeah.
relegated in 51 or whatever it was. And in the
Yeah.
meantime, had some games for England. But he had an incredibly heroic past behind
So
him.
he can be forgiven the United States game, given what he did in the war
Well, I
then.
think you've got to cut him some slack at this point. But also in that same 1950 World Cup party, Eddie Bailey, who subsequently
Yes.
goes on to be Tottenham assistant manager to Bill Nicholson in the 60-61 season, the double season. Eddie Bailey has fought through Belgium, Holland, and Germany in 1944 and to 45. In other words, again, very intense fighting in that part of northwestern Europe. Alan B. Chilton, well known to yourself, I suppose.
Yes. Yes.
Durham Light
Manchester centre back.
Infantry, Normandy Landings, 1944. So yeah, centre half for Manchester United in that golden period when they were four times runners up. They won the
And
league, they won the cup,
48 Cup. Yeah.
and he's just a forerunner for the Busby Babes. So, but he had a tremendous war record too. So those were all England internationals, all of who wore the Three Lions uh, on their shirt, while at the same time having a really sort of heroic past behind them. And I don't think
Mm.
that's not overstating it. Heroic is the right word. Do you want anything to add, Carl, as
Well,
we're coming towards the end?
I think one thing that is interesting, one of the most interesting wars of the post-war player, of course, was Bert Trautmann
Of course.
fighting on the other side,
Yes.
who apparently won 5 medals.
Yes.
And but in all seriousness, I
Yes.
do think it's a heartwarming story, the way in which he was, after initial hostility, taken in by the Manchester City fans and loved so much, and to a large degree, a person who deserves credit for that was a rabbi
Mm,
in Manchester
mm.
who wrote in the local paper. Uh, a guy called Alexander Alton, and he urged the Manchester City supporters to show respect for Trotman and to not blame one young man for the horrors of the Holocaust. And I think that's quite a heartwarming story, that we've got all these heroes who fought for Britain, and on this sharing the same pitch with them on a large number of occasions was somebody who'd fought on the other side, who turned out to be a very decent man himself.
No, you're right. That is a kind of inspiring story because, as you say, it starts off with the Manchester public very much against Troutman, and
Mm.
he eventually, or quite quickly actually, turns them around and is seen as a hero of the fans. So, well, it's a fascinating story, and there's lots of detail that no doubt that we've missed, but there's lots of detail that we've reflected on. And as I say, I think the most important feature here is that these heroes showed real heroism, and we can only respect them for that. So thank you very much again, Karl, as always.
Thank you,
And
Peter.
we shall be back in a week or two with another fascinating story from the 45 to 70 period. Bye bye now. Bye bye.
Bye.